Welcome back to the SDDC Virtual Symposium. We're here for the MegaTalk. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the state of the software-defined data center. I'm sure all of us have had this experience where we are in kind of this classical IT environment. We're locked in a room for days doing this intense project planning. We've got the developers there, we've got the application owners, we've got finance, we've got program managers, everybody's there. We plan out this project, schedules, budgets, and now we start this 6 to 12 month journey of deploying a new application. Most IT organizations and most enterprises, that's the state of the art, right? The software-defined data center is trying to move to a different model. It's trying to help those enterprises on their journey to a cloud operating model. So what does that look like? If you're a developer, it's really about velocity. I want to construct an application out of microservices. I want to spin up those microservices in whatever quantity makes sense. I may deploy those microservices in a hybrid cloud. I may deploy them on-prem. All of those sort of things. It's really about enabling that developer velocity. That sounds very compelling, and for many businesses it is very compelling. The software-defined data center is really trying to create that experience for the developer, and it's no small task. So today we're going to talk about what it is, what it means to create that developer velocity by delivering operational agility through the software-defined data center. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about requirements. We're going to talk about some of how we deliver that business value. We've got a great panel here of leaders in the software-defined data center business. And we'll do some introductions and then we'll dive into some Q&A. So Greg, why don't you start?
Perfect. Thanks again for the time. So my name is Greg DeFry. I'm from Scality. I'm the general manager for the Americas. I'm actually based on the East Coast, just south of Boston. And I've actually been in the object storage and software-defined storage space for well over 10 years. Joining Scality, Scality has a unique history of being a pure software-defined organization. We actually were founded about 10 years ago. July marked our 10-year anniversary. And if you look at our history and where we've started, is we've been a leader in scale-out or distributed file and object for many, many years. And we work a lot with our friends at HPE and our joint go-to-market and executing that vision with joint customers and partners, et cetera. So, we look specifically at solving the unstructured data problem. What I would say is that landscape has drastically changed when you talk about developers and experience and policy and control and GDPR, and then now it's around multi-cloud. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but for us is that we're really maniacally focused on solving that problem for our customers.
Great. Partho, why don't you?
I'm Partho Mishra. I'm Chief Product Officer for Cumulus Networks. Cumulus is a pioneer in software-defined networking. We started, like you guys, about 10 years ago. And essentially what we've done is we've demonstrated that it is possible to, as a means of facilitating automation, as a means of facilitating developer velocity, to use SDN as a building construct to disaggregate platforms in the data center. And we work really closely with partners like Mellanox over the years to provide these solutions to our customers. We are now in our 4th generation of technologies, and we've worked to demonstrate that it is possible to do much of what's been done in the public cloud in an environment, in an enterprise environment, in a way that's easy to access. And the core focus of our company continues to be to facilitate that transition.
Great. John?
Thanks, Hal. I'm John Kim. I'm Director of Storage Marketing at Mellanox Technologies. Mellanox we are both an enterprise and data center networking company. We do end-to-end networking, meaning adapters, switches, cables, and we focus on high-speed wired networking. And we are obviously a hardware company, but one of our specialties is in helping enable and accelerate software-defined infrastructure. So that includes software-defined storage, like from Scality or Datera, includes software-defined networking, software-defined security. And so we're very happy to work with vendors, all these vendors, including HPE, Cumulus, Scality, Datera, and focus on enabling more of a cloud-like, more of an agile experience in data centers, again, by making that connectivity, that networking hardware that helps accelerate software-defined infrastructure.
Perfect. Chris?
Guys, welcome. My name is Chris Tinker. I'm one of HPE's distinguished technologists. I work in the office of the North America Chief Technologist Office. A lot of words, but at the end of the day, it just means that I work with the various business units within HPE to figure out how we actually bring the realization to the market of workload optimized. If you look at workload optimized, enterprise class, intelligent solutions that can be consumed as a service. They can be consumed as a service, is generating a cloud experience. Now, how do we do this? Well, we do this through partnerships with making sure that we use best in breed of the plumbing, the networking, the best in breed of workload optimized storage capacities, whether it be object, archive type capabilities, whether it be scale out or scale up, whether it needs to be transactional block, whether it needs to be, maybe it's an optimized file. We work with our partners to impress upon them how do we actually bring to market close that gap. You mentioned earlier about bringing in applications. It's really about bringing a time to value, collapsing time to value, and getting that optimized cloud experience back to our consumers.
Great. I'm Hal Woods. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Datera. I'm going to help facilitate the conversation today. Datera is a enterprise software-defined storage, primarily block, targeting mission-critical applications. We distinguish ourselves by delivering continuous availability and predictable performance, which are kind of the hallmarks of enterprise storage. And to that, we add this notion of agility. We're policy-driven. We have a very fast data path. We continuously collect telemetry information and analytics, and then feed that back into the SLA engine that we have within our system to deliver that capability, that policy-driven experience for our customers. And so now I'd like to kind of transition into kind of the meat of the conversation. And any conversation about what's going on in a given ecosystem should start with customer requirements. My experience has been fascinating with, when I talk to customers, it kind of polarizes into two different approaches. If I'm an enterprise customer moving into a cloud operating model, they start with classical enterprise storage requirements. And then they add, how do I get the agility, the automation, the orchestration into that? Conversely, 80% of large enterprises are repatriating some number of applications from public cloud. And they take all the agility, orchestration, automation, all of those cloud-like characteristics for granted. What they really want is predictable performance and continuous availability that sometimes they miss with the cloud. So it's been fascinating to see that dichotomy as I talk to customers. Like to maybe get, Partha, as you talk to software-defined networking customers, what do you hear for requirements?
What we see is, I would say, the centrality of how critical the networking infrastructure is for the enterprise workload. I would say that's kind of the number one thing. I've been doing networking for 30 years, and it used to be that you had maintenance windows on Sunday night when you could go in and do stuff, and now it's a 7/24 world. Right? Things need to be on all the time. And I would say that the number one requirement has become how to automate the operations flow in the data center, not just for the networking pieces, but essentially something that stitches together all of the different constituencies inside the data center, the storage teams, the apps teams, and so on. And what we find is that our customers are very focused on figuring out how they can use the enabling technologies that we provide collectively to facilitate that type of, think of it as end-to-end integration, and not necessarily just for the applications to run. Sometimes it's for simple stuff like plumbing, how to handle trouble tickets. Because for them, those represent large pain points, and that's what we see them focused on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I would observe about the software-defined data center is it's all about Ethernet, right? There is no fiber channel, right? In the
Absolutely.
It's rare. And even things, very high-performance networks like NVMe over Fabric and things like always, people are talking about that over Ethernet. And so I think the networking part becomes just such a critical component of that. So another critical component that often gets overlooked in the quote-unquote software-defined data center is actually the physical infrastructure that enables that. And so John, why don't you talk a little bit about, what is it about for example, Mellanox that you can develop that physical infrastructure that really enables capabilities that customers want from software defined?
Yeah, absolutely, Hal. We see that customers in software defined, they want, as you said, they want the agility. As Partho said, they want the automation. They want the ability to scale out like cloud services. They want that agility to scale out, the flexibility of cloud services, but they also want control, they want availability, they want performance, and in some cases they want control for privacy or security reasons. They want control of the data and the infrastructure. And it turns out that with software-defined infrastructure, it's designed so you can use any kind of hardware, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you should use any kind of hardware. Sometimes you may want to pick the hardware, the right hardware, like servers that are certified or are going to be reliable or are fully supported to your standards as an enterprise, or you want to pick, likewise, a network operating system that's fully trusted and secure and supported, scale-out storage solution rather than building your own. So often we see the enterprises, they want software-defined, but they still want a certain level of availability, trust, security, and as part of that, the hardware, or I guess I get to be a plumber. I'm proud to be a plumber in this sense.
It's got to be there. It has to be.
Someone has to be the plumber. But that choosing the right hardware can make a big difference. So for the networking, but also for the storage media, for the servers, and choosing the right software choices as well. But that underlying hardware can help give you better performance, greater reliability, or even better automation. So that's something that Mellanox specializes in.
Ted, what John's saying there, if you think about the enterprise experience, they want the cloud experience, but it has to be controlled. You have to maintain the balance of the citizens, the applications, and how the applications, the businesses consume the infrastructure. With today's world of NVMe, or maybe it's to scale out object stores that are capable of reaching the heights of performance of throughput or IOPS or transactional workloads that have previously not been able to be achieved. If you look at all NVMe solution stacks that are able to really actually push the envelope on consuming very expensive 100 gig networks, if you're running 100 gig dual rail, or if you're running an all NVMe optimized, workload optimized solution stack, you need to have an idea about how to leverage the actual AI-driven capabilities of these new platforms, such as yourselves or Scality or any of our software-defined apparatuses, as being able to have an API mechanism to control and apply a policy. Making sure we can ensure how the infrastructure gets consumed like a cloud experience.
Yeah. So we all hear it's all about the data.
Yeah.
Right? That's a common theme. We hear that all the time. And there's an explosion in data, and much of it's unstructured. Right? So Greg, why don't you talk a little about kind of what you see as customers need as they deal with, say, unbounded growth in their data?
I think it's, for us, what we see is we'll see traditional workloads, where traditional NAS or traditional client-server applications in things like data protection and backup and retention, is that there's a massive growth there. We're seeing companies double every 2 years. But in parallel, what's happening is that there's this massive digital transformation tsunami coming. These are all these cloud native, this is AI, ML-driven web, social, mobile platforms that are massively distributed and have massive scale, but also have tremendous value to the business. What we see is when we talk to IT, they're actually asked to keep the business running with traditional applications while innovate and extend these new services. And these are the things that the lines of business and the app owners want. They want this extensibility and elastic, anywhere, anytime access. These are a lot of these applications are business to consumer or business to business. And everybody knows what digital experience means to the end user or to the market. It's everything. And it's not only about how they deliver that experience, they also need to understand the value. And we're starting to see more about, not only do I need to store it, but I need near real-time analytic or batch analytic, and I need other platforms to be able to interrogate that data over time. So, for us, as we're seeing this massive shift where we're seeing, I get to manage traditional use cases, which we do, that's really been our heritage, but empowering the application owners, the data scientists to go drive these net new services on a common framework, all derived from policy, software defined on enterprise class hardware. Now the other component is, where does that workload live? So by data value, can I delegate where in terms of region, where in terms of cloud, but keep that as a common API, a common metadata service that the business can drive? And the answer is yes. And we're starting to see some customers are way over here where they've really adopted. We have seen other customers that are really at the forefront of trying to figure out that transformation story. And for us, is we're helping them through that journey. Now, the other folks on this stage know that we're a piece of the puzzle. And I think this is when you start to get into software-defined use cases and deliverable is, there's block, there's object, there's multi-cloud, there's hardware, there's networking, there's distribution, there's orchestration, there's eventing, there's runbooks, there's a lot of things. And I think from my perspective is how we work together with those customers is critical. Because if we execute well on unstructured data, but we don't help connect the dots on the network, it doesn't solve the problem. And I think when we talk about partnerships and how really valuable they are for customers, that's essentially what, for me, from an execution perspective, is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
I was going to say one thing, sort of taking off on that point, which is our experience has been that if you look at the ops flow in the data center and where mistakes get made, a lot of it has to do with, kind of human steps introduced in that process. And so, for a lot of our customers who are pretty far along that transformation process of, kind of automating and orchestrating their internal flows, what they've come back to us with is, as they've stitched a lot of the process together, they want us to provide them networking APIs that they can pull into that overall process so that, for example, if you have a VM that migrates across the network, you don't have to have someone then go in and manually stitch up a VLAN appropriately to kind of mirror its movement, right? And we find that where where that hook is missing, that's where we see more mistakes. So I think it's going to be extremely important for us as a technology industry to be able to provide that kind of end-to-end orchestration capability across all of our components.
Well, I think it's inherent in delivering velocity that you can't have humans involved. Right? It has to be automated. It has to be orchestrated.
Well, customers are on very different aspects of that journey, right? It started with standardization. Then, of course, if you look at that trajectory there, standardization led us to automation, to orchestration, and now this new age of AI-driven intelligence, where we're able to take the insight from these various technologies with APIs to incorporate an RPA, a robotic process automation. It gives you a better, more intelligent experience. That intelligence is built into the solution stacks. And then you can, of course, engage with particular automation workload engines, make own decision engines. These decision engines allow us to figure out where to place workloads based on particular use cases.
Yeah, I think you want to, the humans still want to make the high-level rules.
Right.
You want to set the policies.
Sure.
But you don't, as you said, you don't want the humans doing all the execution and the classification and implementing all those policies across, especially as you go across many switches or servers or storage boxes. The chance of an error just goes up very quickly if you have humans actually implementing all the details.
Let's touch on a little bit because of the notion of analytics and the role that plays, and it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of those sort of things. Because in any large data center, there's a lot of equipment, right? It's generating arguably millions of points of telemetry a day. In our system, right, we do that analytics, we try to feed that back to the customer, but we're one piece of that puzzle. We feed into higher level tools, that sort of thing. Chris, maybe you can talk about InfoSight a little bit and the role that plays, in customers and trying to manage all of that information, which then feeds into the automation and the policy and those sort of things.
Absolutely. InfoSight was it's an AI engine. The AI engine aspect of taking the telemetry from infrastructure. So HPE, of course, we leverage the collaborative product development. We work with our partners. We can't make everything. We work with our partners, best in breed of the technologies, to bring them into a way to bring a solution to market. Now, for InfoSight, it's our AI engine that takes our storage and our server portfolio, takes the actual telemetry data, feeds that into a global learning apparatus. It's just a huge, big data project. And this big data project essentially analyzes all of this data, looks at fingerprints, and it enables us to do several key things. One is inoculation. looking for particular problems that other customers have experienced, and taking those problems, identifying them, and then inoculating the install base, letting those customers know that you're running a server that has it has a particular, maybe it's an interoperability challenge, or maybe it's a particular failure pattern we've detected that we can be addressed. Maybe it's a firmware challenge that if you upgrade, you're putting the business at risk. So these are various things that we're able to do in a global learning. And then this is all being stretched and to allow us to actually work with our partners to figure out how do we actually take all of this and create this robotic process automation capability. This is our API-driven, API framework that allows us to take advantage of various control mechanisms.
So I want to talk a little bit about one of the other values of software-defined from a customer perspective. And that is this notion of they get to decouple the purchasing of the software from the purchasing of the hardware. One of the things we hear constantly is that the customer wants to maintain that choice in how they purchase both the software and the hardware, and then how they amortize that within their own business. Do they do it in a classical way, for example, a perpetual license, or do they do it in a more modern way with things like consumption-based pricing and that sort of thing? In the software-defined networking, how do you think about that problem? Do you have a consumption-based model for that, or is it?
We do have a consumption-based model, but just taking a step back, I have to say that we've gone through, I was going to say spectrum. Spectrum's not the right word. Maybe a 360-degree experience here, because when we started out, we were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and we said, it's got to be based on consumption models, right? And then it turned out that because of the way in which the hardware was sold, and networking is kind of like this old, industry, essentially what we ended up going back to was a model in which anything that was closely coupled with a piece of hardware, we gave our customers the choice to pick a perpetual license if that's what they wanted. But for any of the services associated with it, particularly support, but even services kind of centered around real-time telemetry and so on, we essentially offer it up to our customers on a subscription basis so that they can consume based on what it is that they need. And I would say that's generally worked very well. The second thing that I was going to say was kind of independent of pricing. I think the support model that the customer expects requires a degree of partnership between the software company and our hardware partners, which needs to be incredibly tight. And I would say that one of the learnings for this last several years has been our ability to put those processes together to make it such that for the customers, the experience is not very different than it would be in a traditional model. In other words, they go talk to one entity that supports them, and then behind that they get the same type of support, no matter whether it's a software issue or a hardware issue.
It's been fascinating. Is anytime you talk to a large enterprise that's moving towards a cloud model, right? They have a little bit of everything. They have legacy applications and legacy infrastructure. They may have new applications and new infrastructure. They've got virtual machines. They've got containers. They've got bare metal, right?
They could have some hybrid cloud.
Exactly. And so, one of the challenges of the software-defined data center that is oftentimes missed, perhaps by some of the engineers and things like that, is it's not just about the new applications, right? It's about the range of application the customer wants, because they don't want to have to buy 15 different solutions, right?
Sure.
They want to buy a small number of solutions that meets that breadth of requirement.
Well, you get the three pillars there. If you get workload optimized, you get the intelligent aspect of it, and then consumed as a service. I know HP has this Green Lake. Now, all that is taking these various technologies and wrapping it into a consumable, consumption-based model. Yep. We do that with all of our partners. So it just goes back to your point, consumed as a service. How do you optimize that in the agility of software-defined? It allows us to be able to have the granulation of scale, but that granulation of scale, it also comes back to how do you consume it? From how does IT consume this? And they can actually pay for it by the SIL.
Yeah.
And I think when you talk to customers and you go into, hey, what have I actually utilized? On average, for every dollar they spend, they're probably using 20 cents. So when you go in and talk to customers about transforming is, well, I have a lot of excess stuff. My utilization rates are not where they need to be. And they tend to buy for 3 or 5 years up front, hoping that you'll scale into it. And I think, now you're asking, hey, let's go into the software-defined transformation, and a different operating model investment is already paid for here, is how are you going to bridge that gap for them? In like GreenLake, in those types of things, consumption-based or even subscription-based, allow customers to have the new house and then move their furniture into the new house and optimize on the fly without really, for allowing them to realize the value of what's already there.
Well, we're giving you're giving the cloud experience, but at an enterprise capability. Right. All the features, the durability, the reliability, the level of being able to meet certain compliances and security. These are things that our enterprise customers are asking for.
But I think that on the budget side is, I think a lot of CFOs now are just saying, look, I'm not getting the return. So going consumption-based, that means, hey, maybe, and then have somebody else manage my supply chain. So that way I don't have 80% overhead on the network, I have a buffer of 20. Right. And then I have bursting capability, and I pay for that burst when that particular workload requires it, which is very similar to what they get in public cloud. However, there's other security and get costs and egress and networking and other things, is that I think we have a really good option of how to address those things in the data center. And I think if you can do that appropriately, we're seeing customers drive down costs sub-public cloud in the data center by adopting those types of principles.
What enables, even for all of us, it enables us to provide a differentiated experience for customers who have a seasonality to their business. Whether it's seasonality of, maybe it's AI intelligence or AI, and maybe whatever they're doing.
Or e-commerce or...
Absolutely.
End of year closing. So in terms of consuming networking, traditionally network hardware has not been sold on a consumption model. However, with Mellanox, we have sort of two approaches to that. One is that we try to make sure we offer the switching in a right-sized form factor so that you don't force to always buy 32 ports when you only need 16 or 18 or 12 ports. But the other thing is that we do work through our partners to enable consumption-based, consumption-based pricing. So, for example, if someone is doing hosted storage or consumption-based storage that includes Mellanox networking, then we do support consumption-based pricing through that. Or HPE sells a version of our switch called the HPE M series, and they offer the ability to buy some of the ports and then enable more ports later. And so that's not something we support directly, but through our partnership with HPE, that's available. And that's a type of consumption-based pricing.
You mentioned the decouple between hardware and software. And I think there's two things that I see. Number one is customers have autonomy to use the latest and greatest hardware that comes out, and you have a common software service that manages it as one service. The other thing is that customers every 3 to 5 years are used to doing traditional tech refreshes. Is that if you can slide in the new stuff and evacuate the old stuff and the service runs, these software-defined platforms are designed for that type of experience. So we're commonly seeing customers that will have multi-generation under one system, which is powerful because that's not typical in platform situations. It's usually going to stay within the same family, but also it's when tech refresh time comes, it's not like I have to copy this stuff to this stuff and then flip the switch. It's the system runs, I put the new stuff in, the system runs, I pull the old stuff out when I want to, and the service continues to operate.
That's a key differentiation with the software-defined, especially with scaled-out technologies that facilitates that type of apparatus where customers are able to take advantage of not only the newer technologies, but as the workloads change. Because day one, everybody says, well, here's the workload, this is what workload is going to be for 2 years, and we all have seen that situation where 6 months in, other businesses or other application, other teams or the software people throw their workload at it. It shifts the consumption of that infrastructure, and therefore we've got to be able to be more agile. And software-defined facilitates that type of capabilities.
Yeah, if we pull back to the notion of developer velocity, right? What you want them to do is you just want them to deploy.
Correct.
Right? And then if they make a bad guess up front, right? You want to be able to adjust later on. Right, so this notion of not just policy-driven, where you set the policy once, right? But this notion of as either the business changes, the workload changes, or the technology changes, right? I can change that policy to live applications, and the system just keeps running. That's the promise of software-defined that I think we've just now delivered, right? So if we talk about where are customers in their journey towards a cloud operating model. A lot of that is dictated by us being able to deliver the software-defined data center in a way that matches their business needs. And
I think that also to that, the big thing that we see is we're working with customers that are used to managing boxes as an integrated unit. And it's changing your operating model to adapt to software-defined principles is key, because when you go to software-defined, you have an OS, you have storage software, and you have a hardware platform, and then you get networking, and then software-defined network. Before, if I can speak for storage, is if I had a NAS system, it's one person. Now I've got an OS person, and security is part of that with patching. I've got a server person, because it's a server, and that's a different group than storage. And then I have software-driven storage. So how do I do my run book? How do I triage? How do I run that? Is that we often have to provide education and training and basically provide them with what is this new model? What does Nirvana look like? Because IT is used to a particular mode that hasn't changed in many, many years. And I'm not going to lie and say it's the same. It's not. It's different.
Greg, you bring up a good point. In the enterprise, it's usually those three, right? Yeah. Compute, network, storage.
Yeah. And I think for us is that when customers want to make that decision, it's all the value drivers we talked about, but helping them with what is that operating model need to align to is huge. And I think that's either where these projects really sink or swim.
And I was going to say, independent of technology, independent of everything else we've talked about, our number one learning has been that the thing that either makes these projects very successful or not as successful is the ability of the IT team to be agile, to pick up these transitions and then to run with it. And we've had two kinds of experiences. The first is no matter what, right? When an enterprise is going through a transformation, it takes a little time for them to build up the automation flow in the first place. But in all the successful experiences, the IT teams adopt the technology, they deploy it, and then after that, iteration 2, 3, 4 is extremely straightforward. Where they sometimes struggle is the initial pioneers develop the solution, kind of deploy it, and then it's an IT learning or training exercise to make sure that everyone else kind of comes up to speed. And I think as an industry, there's a lot more that we can do in terms of facilitating that, kind of that training and that transformation.
And part of the, even the program, the vehicle that we actually go to market with our partners, HPE Complete is the actual, the program name, but we take and create not only white papers, reference architectures, but we create packages that accelerate that, right? We take the complexity of the storage element, the network element, the compute element, and we create references, but we also create a package that we can actually go to market with. We can go to our customers and say, this has all been already worked out for you. Here's all the individual components. You can, of course, consume it piecemeal, or you can work with us and we'll put it together for you, showing you the best of breed technologies brought to you to deliver the outcome you want, and of course, an accelerated time frame. And of course, collapsing the learning curve, the difficulty, by having appliances. It's not an appliance, it's just a mere fact, it's a model.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think making it easy to iterate, easy to consume, easy to scale and train, it's really important with software-defined infrastructure, because by its nature, if you start out with a pilot or with one part of the data center and it works, you're going to then be expanding. You're going to have more workloads thrown at you. More departments or applications are going to want to run on your infrastructure. So you need to be able to expand and adapt and support different kinds of workloads and different models, because it's the nature, and the more successful you are, the more flexible you'll have to be as you grow your deployment.
And learning how to look at the telemetry and leverage the actual technologies to understand what the scale. Is the workload needing compute, or is it needing network, is it needing storage, where are the weight channels? And it's being able to take all this telemetry data and being able to bring that telemetry data back into either an info site at HP or any of these technologies to be able to funnel that up and bring a dashboard that gives us quick decision trees, intelligence that we can actually discern, take a global install base and make an action out of it.
Yeah, you mentioned every customer we've worked with, right? If we're their first big software-defined storage project, right? They have a much bigger idea in mind for how to use that, right? They're piloting something that they really desperately want to be successful because they want all those business benefits of velocity and all those sort of things. And so it really is important to manage that experience, right? So we use the word appliance, and that usually has a negative connotation in the software-defined world. But what we're really delivering is a complete solution that the customer can roll out.
A package.
And they know that it's really software-defined, right? But we want to make sure that that's successful. So oftentimes it's just partnerships we have, right? In making sure we bring our technology in partnership with somebody like HPE and that the customer's familiar with HPE, right? So they have that trusted relationship. You're introducing a new technology, perhaps, and the customer, when they have that good experience, right? They're looking for where's the next place I can use that.
Sure.
I think, when a lot of the pursuits that we work with customers are all net new, right? So we have a number of installs, obviously many with HPE, and we've got trillions of objects under management. But when you get into a customer and you're talking about a new platform, a lot of the decision criteria is around choice, flexibility, deployment model. What does the tech refresh look like? What does the manageability look like? What does that operating model look like?
What is the technology? Because even the technology could be new, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. What are the underpinnings? What's the reliance on the underpinnings, and how does that all work together? There's a lot of education that happens from a pre-sale perspective to understand is there's typically a workload or a use case and a pain, and there's probably 3 to 5 ways they could technically solve the problem. But in a lot of things we're talking about is decoupling and choice and tech refresh and extension to cloud and policy-driven versus kind of manually provisioned and automation and all these other things. Is that those are really the value story. And I think when customers learn about it, I think they want it. I do think that, to your point, is this is probably their first project in this area, and there's a little bit of getting out on the skinny branch, and they're afraid. So I think we do things that are we can put people there for 6 months, a year, or less, and kind of help them down the path, and then give them the run book and they can go. Or some customers say, hey, we want it completely hands off. We want to have you guys run it.
As a service.
As a service. And we just want the experience back and the economics and the flexibility. But
Greg, you bring up a good point, because I just thought about the workshops we actually work together.
Yep.
All of us work, and we provide workshops for our customers to actually bring them through that transformation phase. Because in a lot of these walks of different technologies, we're talking about not only is the actual software-defined data center coming about, but how is it being consumed in delivering services? You said microservices earlier. How are we actually delivering services to the consumer, the business, the application, the developers, what have you? But it could be either containerization, it could be virtualization, it could be bare metal or big data, machine learning. Maybe they're wanting to deploy an Elasticsearch and they're trying to figure out how to use these various technologies. These are all relevant. The question becomes, working with them in a workshop methodology to figure out what is the business challenge, what is the outcome being sought, and then we can figure out what exactly is the scale, and then the technologies to solve the business outcome.
Part of our learning here, by the way, has been that even in relatively old technology areas like networking, there's a tremendous degree of interest that the IT teams have to learn these new technologies. So as we, Chris, as we offer these certification programs and so on, which are broad education, not necessarily just for a specific project, we actually find that there's a lot of engagement. And when we find some of these IT teams, kind of in their first iteration through this training, at the end of it, they're phenomenally productive.
Well, it's exciting too. So it's just
cool.
fun. Every workshop, everybody comes out of it. It's just a new technology, but it's not just new technology for new technology's sake. It's being able to address business challenges in an accelerated fashion
with new solutions.
With new solutions, absolutely.
But I would say is in that area, right, is training or building that champion so they're knowledgeable is. If they can understand that and how to execute it, they're extremely valuable from a professional perspective, because this is where everything's going. They can also be a beacon inside their organization, a beacon of change. That the other thing is, IT and the app teams don't typically align well. So in a lot of it is because I think they're coming at it from 2 different angles. And I think some of the things we're talking about in terms of education is. The developers want that experience. They'll go direct to cloud and go around IT, because they're saying they don't have the tools, they don't have the service catalog, they don't have the agility, they don't have the things I need. We can empower them to go back to those folks and say, I can give you cloud-like in data center or across multiple clouds in a simple to consume catalog that is programmatic and easy to use with enterprise grade features. Right now I think some customers have done that very well, and I think a lot of customers are saying, I'm trying to build that layer to my lines of business, and a lot of the things we're talking about empowers IT to go drive those conversations. Right now, I think it's hit or miss in organizations, whether they are or they're not.
Sure.
Yeah,
Greg, I think not only the IT, as you said, the IT teams and app teams aren't always 100% aligned. Even sometimes within IT, the network team and the storage
that's
team aren't
true.
fully aligned. And they may not be fully aligned. They may go to war with the server team occasionally.
That's kingdoms.
So, right. So so I think a lot of what we can do in adding value to help help drive software-defined data center and agility,
And
is
maybe the
fact that we
security
do.
team too.
Well,
Security team.
exactly,
Security
right. They could
team.
be,
Oh, yeah.
they could be
You could have
going
many
to war with
teams.
everybody. But no,
Totally.
you're doing it wrong. You have to do it this way. But by working together with partnerships, testing, reference architectures, deployment guides, mutual support models, that all helps them overcome these barriers so they can work more closely together and have smoother deployments.
Well, I think this notion of this division between the application owners and the IT organization, that's always existed, right? We're actually, the software-defined data center is actually trying to create an environment where the application owners can move quickly because the infrastructure is ready and able to deal with that. And if they need to, you can scale it, you can grow it, you can change it. That's the cloud, right? If you go to AWS, right, you don't have to ask, well, do they need to install some new disk drives for me to, provision some more
Point-click
storage,
buy.
right?
Yep.
You don't think about those things. If somebody's trying to implement a private cloud, right, that's the experience they're trying to deliver, right? And that's really the essence of what the software-defined data center is to create this notion of developer velocity for the application owners, right, and this operational agility for the IT folks. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right. It's very challenging, and whether it's a security issue, data management, right, storage, networking, all those things are incredibly complex.
A lot of your IT departments are in a transformation as going from just traditional IT delivery, operation control, to being able to facilitate IT services to the business, meaning self-service catalogs. And those self-service catalogs come back to the software-defined data center having the ability to have APIs and control logics, right? But that's under the hood. It's the self-service catalogs that quickly deploy particular workloads.
Workloads and the right amount of infrastructure with storage, servers, networking, or maybe security too, to go with those workloads.
That's a scary thing because now the self-service aspect of it, the all of a sudden those app owners, the businesses, all of a sudden they're clicking a button starting to allocate services. And those services, the infrastructure has to be able to handle the elasticity of those workloads. And now IT operations delivery, that's a new working model for them.
Well, it used to be, right, we talk about, when we started out, we talked about this notion of locking ourselves in a room with the IT folks and the application owners, right, to do a project, right? Right. Now, right, the application owner, right, just assumes the infrastructure is available.
That's right.
Right, and the IT folks have to be ready for that. It's a very, very, very challenging environment.
It is.
One of the crucial things I think there is, you talked earlier about real-time telemetry, about visibility, is providing that type of insight in terms of what's actually going on. We have a customer, he'll stay unnamed, he had this really insightful comment. He said, you know what, when something breaks on my network, I know right away. But there's tons of stuff that's not broken, that's not working well, and I have no idea. Right. And I think where he was going with this was, kind of the traditional model, if you ran a workload on a server and you designed it well and provisioned it and you had the tools in place to observe it, sort of, if you were Mr. IT, you had your arms around it. But in this world with dynamic workloads, with VMs and containers kind of flowing everywhere, with application owners turning up services on the fly, we find that our customers who provide a lot of the infrastructure, really benefit from tools, from the capability to get visibility. And I think especially, Chris, you talked about some of these AI capabilities that you folks are building up. I think that's incredibly useful in terms of getting to them to the point where they feel that what they've designed the network for is actually meeting kind of the customer requirements.
To your point, when I start thinking about performance, because usually, break, fix, something's broke, you usually know it, right? The data service is unavailable. But what if the unavailability of the aspect of the service is a result of saturation? And that saturation, you want to know who's doing it. Maybe it's the object, and there's a massive throughput that's causing a problem in the network, and the congestion, flow control, and all that mess. So you're having to look at the variability of the workloads, the deviation from the norms, and figuring out how can we identify this. And that's it's not impossible for humans, but humans have to look at that data days later, and then analyze that data, then make a decision on, okay, here's what we saw. It's more imperative that the software-defined data center be made up of technologies that are intelligent, They have APIs that provide that insight back up, and we can take that decision engine and look at, we can see the variability, and then we can fingerprint known workloads or unknown workloads, looking at a deviation from a norm so that we can provide intelligence back to the business, letting them know that particular user X has kicked off a workload, and that workload is consuming 80% of the performant capabilities of the apparatus, the infrastructure.
Well, one of the things I think we're finding more and more, and maybe from a networking side this has always been the case, but from a storage side it's a little newer, is the notion of multi-tenancy.
Yes.
Right? You're used to having networks with lots of different traffic flowing over them. Right? In storage systems, typically a storage system was dedicated to a given workload. Right? Now, if we're trying to support this notion of a cloud operating model, right, it's multi-tenant. Right? We have people, noisy neighbors, all those sort of things. So we have to implement, various ways of dealing with that to ensure that we meet an SLA. Right? And it creates a big challenge.
We know at software-defined data center, that consumed cloud as experience that you just alluded to there, SLA is the key one. That's a big change because to be a service provider, you're always held to an SLA. So now IT organizations are crafting either OLAs, operating level agreements, or SLAs back to their business, much like you would in the cloud. It's a cloud experience.
Yeah, so the Mellanox networking offers at the hardware level the ability to do different traffic classes, different prioritization, but the planning and intelligence for that usually comes from software like Insight or Cumulus, which can help decide what do I want, what are my policies, and how can I implement them. So we provide that, our networking provides that low-level telemetry and that ability to segregate or prioritize traffic, but we usually rely on partners like Cumulus, like HPE, in order to get the intelligence and set the policies that you want to deliver the outcomes that you want.
We talk about policies, which I think are critical, but what it really talks about is raising the level of abstraction. Right? Sure. The customer isn't provisioning, down to the micro level anymore, right? They're saying, I need storage of this class, right? Or I need networking of this class. And they just want to provision that as a kind of a bulk activity and then let the policies take it from there.
Swim lanes.
Yeah. And so, we keep finding that, customers, they keep wanting to fall back to the way they've done it, right? I want to have tight control over all that. But if you're provisioning 100 containers, right? You simply can't do it the old way. It has to be orchestrated. Do you find, on the networking side, do you have that level of orchestration involvement?
We do. So maybe just backing up a little bit, I would say that, for our customers, a typical experience is as follows, right? Which is, we work with them. We kind of enable them to deploy the automation. And then it's this, wow, with the push of a button, I can get 500 switches, up and running, and it's really like this epiphany. You can see it in their faces. But equally, if you can turn up 500 switches with the push of a button, you can destroy 500 switches, right? So a lot of our focus, just in terms of deep technology, has been making use of real-time telemetry. Is there a way in which we can build in? Think of it as checkers, validation, testing, which essentially allows us to verify that when something is deployed, that it's working, that it's doing what it's intended to. And that's the key, right? What is it intended to do? So, at least at the networking level, it's usually about connectivity and performance. So there's ways to, kind of build that into the SLAs and then verify against that. But I think more and more, to your point, as there are these higher level policies that the IT teams want to administer, we need a language, we need the tools by which that can be propagated.
It's a big tool framework because if you think about policies, I mentioned earlier about swim lanes, but it has more than just swim lanes, right? In the compute world, it's CPUs and GPUs and the fragmentation of those resources. At the network, you got congestion, you got flow, you got the actual multi-tenancy aspects. At the storage level, you've got durability. The reliability and durability, maybe it's replica copy, maybe it's eraser coded, maybe it's RAID in various forms of RAID, maybe it's snaps like a backup retention, copy data management. So all of these aspects come into being able to quantify essentially a cost to a service. So if you were to break it down, and you could say cost per capacity, but it's a tiers model. But it's being able to abstract what traditionally was done in a hardware elements and break that into a software abstraction, to your point earlier. And then create these various ways of maybe I'm doing backup as a service. Maybe in the service catalog, you click HA. So now there's an HA component to that characteristic, workload. But it's all about creating this ecosystem that has a policy that implements via the APIs and the control logic.
Yeah, so instead of just having tiers of capacity or performance, now you, as you said, you need tiers of data protection,
Correct.
tiers of redundancy or availability, even tiers of different, perhaps block storage versus object and file storage. So it's a wider variety of tiers and services that go into that catalog now, instead of in the past, someone might have just said, well, how much per terabyte?
Right.
So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. We've got a few minutes left and talk about the business value we're delivering, right? So Greg, you mentioned earlier, right? People still over provision, right? They buy for the long haul, even though scale out technologies are, pretty mature at this point. Right. And so how do we convince the customers to grow as they need, right, as opposed to do that big, upfront purchase?
I'm okay with that big upfront purchase. I'm just saying, that's okay. That's what you want to do, that's fine. But to me, if you're going to get cloud economics, there's the cost of the asset, but it's how much do you get to use of that asset without running into issues. So we want customers to run at 70, 80% consumed. We absolutely do that. We want that because that's ultimately when they're realizing an extremely powerful TCO and ROI. So like from a customer perspective is, when we look at software-defined and scale-out technologies, we look at solving the problem differently. We're not looking at RAID sets and snapshots and replications. It's all driven by policy. And we have different knobs and dials. We're protecting data. We don't protect hardware. And that's a different model than traditional platforms, which we're typically replacing, where I've got a drive and I need to copy it, or I've got 5 drives and I need to do RAID on top of it. So I'm protecting the drive. We're protecting the data. So as a consumer, I have the ability to set policy at a data level, or at a bucket level, or at a tenant level. And I can do things like physical, logical isolation to provide a service level, a guarantee of performance, a guarantee of security, and all these other things. Now, when we talk about multi-cloud, is that now we take those same principles and extend it to AWS, Google, Azure, and cloud of choice under one framework and policy selector, which gives a common experience back to the business, which is really what IT is trying to provide back to the line of business. And that's just for the data tier, right? Obviously, we talked about networking and compute-attached storage, which is block, and then understanding the full supply chain and where those bottlenecks are for optimizing and tuning. But our goal is to provide a stateless data tier for our customers, no matter anywhere, anytime access, multi-site active, and distributed. Now, from a decision perspective is we commonly have to always go back to, what is this, how is this different from maybe my traditional object system or a NAS system, which is all encompassing operating system and stuff. And it's all about choice and flexibility is I can use, Gen 10 Apollo gear, and then when the Gen 11 stuff comes out, slide it in. Or you know what, if I want to use 12 terabyte drives today and I get empty bays and I want to use the 16s when they come out, that's fantastic. Those are things that you can't do with traditional architectures. And we also can design I can scale for capacity and performance independently, which is very unique principle for how Scality operates.
It's a key differentiation in software-defined, being able to scale those in a disaggregated methodology.
Right, and I think a lot of times is they're usually buying a box. That box has stuff in it, and if I need more performance, I add another brick, and that's where you get into the lopsided, I have all these things because I need the performance, but I don't need the capacity. Right. So our ability to deploy a number of different form factors based on workload demand and requirement. If I've got billions of tiny files, I might have more CPU and memory and SSD. If I've got a large, cheap archive, I need a cheap dumping ground, I might have big, huge, 60, 100 drive bay systems because that's a capacity-driven use case. And I might have all in between. So giving the customers the knobs and the dials, and for us, we license based on data, not on raw hardware provisioned. Very different from traditional platform. I buy a SAN or third-party SAN system. I got 1,000 drives in it. I license it for 1,000 drives. Whether I use it or not, we license on data. So if you buy 10 petabytes of stuff, but you have a petabyte of data, but you want 4 copies or 6 copies, it's a petabyte license. And we basically just manage that true up ongoing as we just look at how much data is under managed, and we just manage through it that way. So when you start talking about those types of things, I think the value story really resonates. But what we talked about before, it's all about how you empower IT to run it. or if they don't want to run it, how we can help them run it as an offering or an integrated offering.
So how about on the networking side? I mean, how does the customer perceive whether you're delivering that business value? And do you think from a software-defined platform and in the physical infrastructure, are we delivering that business value?
Well, I would say that, going back to first principles, I think the value is on 2 or 3 different axes. The thing that we started out with was, enterprises want to be in some ways, have IT services that feel from a consumption model standpoint like the public cloud. Services can be turned up quickly, they're easy to consume and so forth. Especially for the app, the folks that are developing and deploying the apps. And what we find is that for our customers who are consuming software-based networks, their first, epiphany is all centered around how easy it is to deploy once they kind of, get over the initial training hump. But second, then in terms of the consumption model, what happens is once you build out, what in our world would be called a pod, once you build out, a set of pods, scaling that to double that or triple that or quadruple that is easy, right? And for them, I think that's the key element, right?
That's the light that comes on.
Exactly, that when they need additional capacity, that's what they can do. And then just in terms of, kind of the nitty-gritty, some of the networking technologies like virtual overlays and so on, allow them to, with multi-tenancy, not just support different types of applications and internal business users, but also get the visibility. Where if someone comes back and says, I think my service is not running well, because it's running over an overlay, because you have visibility into what's happening on the overlay, you can provide that SLA assurance back to the application developer. So for us, I would say the value has been primarily around those 2 axes, kind of the automation benefits, and then of course, the ability to scale out as capacity needs increase.
Yeah. John, any thoughts?
Our value proposition there is a little bit lower level. So I would say, if you have your actual applications here, and then maybe you have Datera and Scality here and Cumulus here, we're a little bit at a lower level, but people still care about, and it still matters what we do. The policies and the integrated deployment automation might be done at the Cumulus level, but how smoothly it goes, how scalable each switch is,
how granular it is,
right, how consistent the latency is. That actually matters on the hardware. That's where the NICs, having the right NICs and the right switches and the right cables can make a difference. So having our switch is not going to change your your deployment policy or your automation policy, but if, for example, we can support more VXLAN routes than most of our competitor switches. We can have lower latency and more consistent latency. So it just makes everything run more smoothly, more scalable, whether you have more nodes or faster storage or faster servers. And so that's the value we add at the actual network infrastructure level. I sort of like that term, better plumbing for the network.
So Chris, you work with customers, I'll say in the large, right? You're talking to them about a broad set of needs. Each of us serves maybe a narrower need.
Sure.
So from your perspective, are we delivering on that promise of the software-defined data center?
Yes, yes, in many dimensions. Look, it comes down to, you look at workload optimization, right? So customers today, they have varying degrees of workloads. I mentioned it earlier around the variability of workloads, the unpredictable aspect of actual workloads over time. And if you look at these right here, our customers today are needing things like, working with another customer right now that essentially went from 1 gigabyte per second to 12 gigabyte per second. And the workload changed from just something simple as about 50,000 IOPS to right up 2.5 million IOPS. What was the workload difference? Doesn't matter. It was their business. Their business changed, and they needed a way to actually scale this. How do you do it? So workload optimized, intelligent platforms, and they want it consumed as a service. So they're looking at the granulation of being able to scale it up. How do you do this? I mentioned IOPS. You've got objects. You've got file operations. Again, this is workload dependent. But in the world of software-defined, it's being able to take a different agility to the actual particular apparatus of the workload, the fault domain. I call it the blast radius. The blast radius is being able to say, this is the amount of business that I'm going to run in this ecosystem. Traditional landscapes look like X, so you big iron systems. But in this world where customers are wanting the software-defined, agile, predictable performance, the only way we can even achieve a predictable performance is being able to have intelligent platforms that have the KPIs fed up to an AI engine, a methodology that sits there and gives us the ability to be able to understand what is being consumed, who's doing the consumption, and more importantly, how I can take it back to the business and go, here's how you're consuming it.
Yep.
Do you wish to put a policy on it? Maybe you wish to put a gate on it. Maybe you wish to do whatever, but at the end of the day, it's being able to show the business how this ecosystem is being consumed. One case in point, your switches are 100 gig, right? If you think about 100 gig switches, 200 gig switches and higher, this was never done traditionally. Normally, if you're looking at fiber channels, 16 gig, 32 gig, of course, is out now, but in traditional landscapes, they didn't even keep up with how we're doing it today in our 100 gig, in our NVMe. Maybe you're wanting to do NVMe from the client. Maybe you're wanting to do massively scaled, massively concurrent, and essentially parallel requests into an object store. How do you do this at scale? How do you maintain the policies? It takes a workload optimized solutions, intelligent platforms, and of course, to enable all this, we want to be able to do it consumed as a service.
Yep. Well, kind of in closing, I think what we want the audience to take away from this is the software-defined data center is here.
Yes.
Right? Yes. It's not something 2 years from now. It's something you can deploy today and realize that value. Right? It gives you the developer velocity, the operational agility, automation, performance,
scale.
Flexibility, scale. All of those things that have been that promise of software-defined, right? That we've lived for many years, but all of the pieces are coming together, and partners like HPE are able to deliver that value. So I want to say thanks to all the panelists here. This has been great, and I hope the audience is able to take away that it's ready.
It is ready.
Thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al.